Don't stop.
District Superintendent Robert Runcie, he said potentially there could have been signs out there, but we didn't have any warning or phone calls or threats that were made. But his classmates, the shooter's classmates, say he was a well-known threat at the school. A lot of people were saying that it was going to be him. Right? One of the students said everything he posts is about weapons. It's sick. And they are looking at some of the motives behind all of this, but apparently he was a loner. Law enforcement says he was a member of J. ROTC, Junior Reserve Officer Training Corps. He was apparently in an alternate school, and people didn't want to be anywhere near him. He was reportedly wearing a gas mask and carrying smoke grenades during the alleged massacre. It's not clear where he got the smoke grenades. He used an AR-15 223, which is a semi-automatic, most commonly owned semi-automatic rifle in the United States. That was legally garnered. He had it legally, apparently. He bought it legally. The smoke grenades, no one knows where those came from or whether he got those legally at all. We also know that the FBI was apparently warned last September about this guy. So there was a YouTube user who used his real name. This guy used his real name, and he wrote in response to a video by a vlogger that he was going to be a, quote, professional school shooter. And that vlogger warned the FBI. On Thursday, BuzzFeed reported the FBI had been warned about someone of the same name in late September 2017. BuzzFeed spoke with the YouTube vlogger, Ben Benight, 36, who said he noticed an alarming response to one of his videos posted and immediately contacted the FBI. Agents with the Bureau's Mississippi field office got back to him immediately, Benight said, and conducted an in-person interview the following day on September 25th, according to BuzzFeed. They came to my office the next morning. They asked if I knew anything about the person. I didn't, said the vlogger. They took a copy of the screenshot, and that was the last I heard from them. So you can actually see the screenshot in which the shooter says, I'm going to be a professional school shooter, and uses his actual name. It is not an alias. It is not a pseudonym. Benight told BuzzFeed that around 4:30 on Wednesday, 30 minutes after they took the shooter into custody, Special Agent Ryan Furr of the Miami FBI field office contacted him about the shooter. He said, quote, I think we spoke with you in the past about a complaint you made about someone making a comment on your YouTube channel. I just wanted to follow up with you on that and ask you a question with something that's come up, if you wouldn't mind giving me a ring. So the agents visited him in person for a second time on Wednesday. They asked me if I knew who he was. I didn't. I don't. Then they left. I guess it's vlogger, not vlogger, sorry. In any case, the FBI refused to acknowledge that they made this call or that this guy was on their list. According to former classmate Joshua Charo, 16, he said, all he would talk about is guns and knives and hunting. I can't say I was shocked from past experiences. He seemed like the kind of kid who would do something like this. He used to tell me he would shoot rats with his BB gun, and he wanted this kind of gun, and how he always liked to shoot for practice. Apparently, he escaped the school by hiding among the other students evacuating the area, but then he was arrested in a nearby neighborhood at around 4 p.m. So obviously, shocking stuff. So here's the question now. So the question is, what do we do? Right? The question is, what do we do? There's some stories of heroism that I'm going to talk to you about in a few minutes. But what do we do about situations like this? So the Republicans do what the Republicans typically do, right? They say, we need to wait to find out exactly what's happening here. So Marco Rubio says, listen, the senator from Florida, it's his home state. He said, we don't know how this happened yet. In order for us to fight what exactly happened, we have to know what exactly happened and how exactly it happened. Here's Rubio saying this. He just got shellacked on media over this.
It's not only because people don't know how this happened. I mean, who this person is, what motivated them, how did they get a hold of the weapon that they used for this attack. I think it's important to know all of that before you jump to conclusions that there's some law that we could have passed that could have prevented it. And there may be, but shouldn't we at least know the facts? And so I think that you can always have that debate. But if you're going to have the debate about this particular incident, you should know the facts of that incident before you run out and prescribe some law that you claim could have prevented it. I've seen a lot of that on television, and maybe there is a law that could have prevented this instance. But we don't know that, and neither do they.
That's exactly right. But people were saying, how dare he say this? How dare he? Listen, Glenn Kessler fact-checked this statement by Rubio. Rubio made a similar statement last year, saying all the gun laws that have been proposed wouldn't have stopped a lot of these school shootings. And Glenn Kessler, who is no right-winger over at the Washington Post, concluded that this was true. Because, of course, it's true. Right? The fact is that in this particular case, here's the deal. In a country with 300 million weapons, and there are 300 million guns in the United States, if you are determined to go and hit a soft target with no security present, you're going to find a way to do it. You are. It is not hard to illegally obtain a gun in the United States. Forget about the rules. It is not hard to illegally obtain a gun in the United States. It is not hard to make illegal modifications to a legally obtained weapon. It is not difficult to carry out a terror attack. And this was essentially a terror attack. There is no reason that you can't do that, which brings us to question number two. There are two questions. One, what can we do to minimize the chances that this happens? And number two, how do we maximize the chances that the response time is the shortest so that we can kill somebody like this before they're able to do any more damage? So the answer to question number one, there are some things that we can probably do. Jim Garrity over at National Review has suggested, for example, that we really crack down in more harsh fashion on straw purchasers. Straw purchasers are people who buy a gun and then transfer it illegally to somebody. So I buy a gun legally, and then there's somebody I know who can't get a gun, and so I transfer that gun legally to that person. That makes me a straw buyer. That's illegal. In the last 10 years or something, only 44 people have been prosecuted in serious fashion as straw purchasers, despite the fact that there are thousands of these people who are out there. Right? That obviously needs to stop. Would that have stopped this school shooting? No, because this guy had no criminal record. There was no record of him having been institutionalized, I believe, for any significant period of time that would have barred him from owning a weapon. And that means that it's very difficult to see how he wouldn't have been able to get the weapon. The only way he would have been able to be barred from having the weapon is if the FBI did their damn job, right? If the FBI actually investigated, found this guy, warned local law enforcement. Now, apparently, this shooter was also on the radar for local law enforcement. Apparently, his mom had called up, his mom, I think, recently passed away. Apparently, his mom had called up the police, and they'd had, like, sit-down sessions with this kid. So there were a lot of red flags. Everybody was warning about him, and nobody was able to do anything. So maybe one of the things that we should do as a preventative measure is make it easier to involuntarily commit somebody like this who sounds like he's a sociopath. And maybe we should make it less difficult for family to say, listen, we can't control somebody like this. This person is dangerous. Right now, the law in most states across the union, across the United States, is that we will only put you on a 48-hour hold, a 48-hour psychiatric hold, if you are a danger to yourself or others. Right? And then if you can show that you're not a danger to yourself or others, we release you again. Well, that's probably not enough. Right? Involuntary commitment in the United States is incredibly difficult, very, very tough. Maybe that needs to change, because how many of these school shooters have been people who should have been in psychiatric care? It sounds like this guy was crazy. It sounds like that Jared Lee Loughner in Arizona was crazy. It sounds like that James Alsop, what was his name? I can't remember his name. The evil guy who shot up a theater in Aurora, Colorado. That guy was crazy, obviously. Adam Lanza, the shooter in Sandy Hook, was a crazy person. Right? All of these people should have been forcibly incarcerated for psychiatric care. They were not. There's something wrong with that system. I mean, we have to have heavy screening. We don't want innocent people being forcibly institutionalized, but we do want to make sure that if you have a real mental illness and you're a threat to others, that you're not out on the streets able to walk into a school and start shooting it up. So that's something that there are a couple things you can do right off the bat to stop this. Background checks, would that have stopped this case? No, because again, there was nothing for them to check. He had no criminal record. And the only way that you could presumably stop somebody like him from buying that weapon is to ban the weapon outright, ban the sale of the weapon outright. So that's what the left is starting to propose now, is let's ban the sale of the weapon outright. That probably would not have stopped this particular case because, again, if you are determined there are too many guns in the United States to prevent the illegal sale of a gun to somebody who wants one. And unless you're willing to undergo a full-scale gun confiscation, in which you're talking about hundreds of millions of weapons across the United States, which would not go down without significant violence, particularly in gun-heavy areas, then you're not talking in the real world. You're just not speaking about things that are happening in the real world. In Australia, the gun violence rate has gone down at a lower rate than the United States, despite the gun confiscation. The gun confiscation only took 1/3 of the guns. That was the gun buyback program in Australia. And it's illegal for people to own guns. 2/3 of the people who owned them still own them. So the idea that people are just going to turn over their weapons is insane. It's not going to happen. So then it becomes a question of what can we do practically? And a lot of the measures that the left talks about wouldn't do anything practically when they say ban assault weapons. Okay, so what do you mean by assault weapon? You mean the grip? You mean the way that the stock attaches? Well, what are you talking about assault weapon? You're going to ban all rifles? Because, again, you're going to need a mass confiscation if you actually want that to work. So this is where the rubber hits the road. There are a lot of polls that suggest that Americans want more gun control. These polls are pretty much meaningless. They're about as meaningless as the polls that say that Americans want spending cuts. Right? We want spending cuts until you tell us what it is that you want to cut. Americans want gun control until you tell us what it is that you want to control. If you're telling us that you want background checks, we're pretty much all for that. They exist. If you buy from a federally licensed firearms dealer, as happened in this case, and you fail the background check, you can't buy that gun. That exists. People on the left like to talk about the gun show loophole, the idea of hand-to-hand transfers. There's not a ton of evidence that that is connected to crime, hand-to-hand transfers, that I legally sell my gun to Mathis, for example. And there's not a lot of evidence that that has any impact on crime. But that's not stopping the left from making hay while the sun shines politically. And that's where I really object, is, again, going back to the original point, people on the left continue to insist over and over and over again that if I want to look specifically at what measures they're pushing, then this means that I'm doing something wrong. Instead, I should just give them a blank check because something terrible and evil just at best mixed. It is at best mixed. There are studies that suggest that suicidality, the suicide attempt rate goes down for people who attempt transgender surgery. There's also some evidence that suggests that after a certain period of time, the suicide rate goes back up. So the evidence is just not, it's not perfect in any direction. This is not a cure-all by any stretch of the imagination. But here is how this is going down. CNN writes, quote, an Ohio court will decide the fate of a transgender teen who is in what the judge describes as a gut-wrenching situation. The 17-year-old identifies as a boy. Neither he nor his family can be named according to court instructions. So notice already how CNN starts calling this girl he. Right? This is a biological woman, and CNN is already calling this girl he in order to bias the case. Because if the parents won't acknowledge it, CNN will. The teen's parents want court authority to stop their child from getting the treatment and therapy that was recommended by his medical team in what it characterizes as a possible life or death situation. What makes it a life or death situation? Apparently, the teen is suicidal. And they're suggesting that the cure for the suicidality is hormone treatment and or genital disfigurement. And that is what this team of medical experts suggest. Well, maybe there's another team of medical experts that suggests differently.